Well, Merry Christmas and welcome to the Christian Education Podcast. My name is Paul Matthews and it's a real treat to have you here for the final episode of the year. We might even call it the end of Season 1. Now, I'm guessing that you're like me in that you like to use the month of December as a chance to reflect and review the year that's just been. The year can often just go at a ballistic pace. And if you don't stop and stock take, then a lot of the lessons that could be learned will just simply pass you by. Sometimes that reflection will happen in really deliberate ways, like a pen and a piece of paper, and you're writing yourself up a little SWOT analysis or a cost-benefit analysis or something like that. But often the reflection at this time of year can happen in really organic ways. There are a few people that I try and catch up with every school holidays. And one of the blokes that I caught up with, well, he asked me a very interesting question. He said, Paul, it's, the first 6 months of your podcast. Has it been a success? Now, that is a heck of a question. And while he's able to ask tricky questions, he's not himself an educator, so he probably didn't realise that he chose a great word in the word success, because that's a word that we teachers use all the time. See, if you followed any of John Hattie's work with the visible learning paradigm, you'll know that one of the key things that teachers should do every lesson, or at least they aspire to do, is to give students what we call a success criteria. Well, success criteria is plural, but we give them a standard by which they can say, have I had a successful lesson? Yes or no? What we don't want to do is put students in the position where they get to the end of a lesson or a week or an assignment or even a whole unit of something and go, well, did I do well there? I'm not quite sure. I can't really tell one way or the other. We want to give them really concrete steps by which to measure their success. So you go, okay, by the end of this lesson of geography, the success criterion is that I will be able to list the 7 continents of the world, for example. And then they get to the end of the lesson and then they go, well, did I have a successful geography lesson today? Yes or no? Can I list the 7 continents of the world? I can. Well, then it has been a success. Unfortunately, I didn't have a success criteria for my podcast, but the question of my friend did get me thinking, because I did actually put pen to paper about this podcast long before I put mouth to microphone, if you will. I wrote down 2 goals, 2 things I wanted to achieve. The first one was that I wanted to further the cause of Christian education. Okay, I love this cause. I'm passionate about Christian education. And I know there's many Christians out there who simply haven't thought of education as discipleship. They have perhaps never entertained the thought of sending their Christian child to a Christian school. I mean, the last episode of the podcast we did with Jordan Scott shows that there's plenty of people in that category. And the first part of my mission was to spread the good news of Christian education, so to speak, spread the message to those people. And the second part of it was to get people who are already in Christian education more excited about it. And so, as I thought about my friend's question, has your podcast been a success? I thought, well, probably those 2 goals that I had, they can be my success criteria. And I'm pleased to say, as I look back over the year, by the grace of God alone, I can confidently say that these 2 goals have come to pass. I know that there are people who say that listening to some of these episodes, it hasn't perhaps been the only thing, but it's been one of the things that's moved them in the direction of Christian education. And I know that there are Christian educators out there, or Christian parents, or even Christian students, some of whom are in my own class, and that is an interesting dynamic. However, I know that there are people in those categories who have become more excited about Christian ed. So I'm really, really happy. A prayer that many Christians pray often is the prayer of Psalm 90, where we ask God to establish the work of our hands. And I know I've been praying that over this podcast, and many of you have too. And by His grace, that's exactly what He's done. Let me tell you a little bit about what I've got planned for next year. So there are a couple of areas too, in fact, that I'll share with you that are areas of real personal and professional interest for me. The first of those areas is burnout. So next year, I want to spend time talking to experts, thinking about burnout within education. Now, the statistics for teacher burnout, whether in a Christian school or non-Christian school, let me tell you, those statistics would make your eyes water. They are gnarly, gnarly stats. There are heaps of people who come into the teaching profession, whether straight out of uni and from school, or they've actually changed careers. They come into teaching and they're ready to go. They're red hot. They want to spend their calories making a difference in the lives of children. They're bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. And it's actually only a matter of years before they're packing their bags and saying, hey, this is not for me. So I want to look at the causes behind that. What are the personality causes? What are the systemic causes? What are the things about just the way that education is that makes it a hard thing to do? And how do we tackle this whole problem from a Christian worldview? Of course, the issue of burnout, you start tugging that thread and all of a sudden you're asking questions about what does it mean to be human? What is human flourishing? These are massive worldview questions, and we have to bring the Lordship of Christ to bear on them. So I'm really excited to look into the idea of burnout with a goal of understanding ourselves more, understanding the teaching profession more, and hopefully putting educators in a space where they don't burn out, where they're able to flourish and thrive in the job of being an educator. The second area that I'd love to look into is the area of conflict. You can see I haven't chosen easy topics to hone in on here. I want to look at conflict. Now, conflict in the Christian school is surely one of the places where our Christian worldview must manifest most clearly. The way you do conflict is intrinsically shaped by, again, big concepts like, well, who is this other person? What is their value and worth to me? Is there such a thing as truth in this situation? Or is that all relative? I want to be thinking about how we do conflict in a Christian school because in some ways it's just inevitable. It's going to be intensely practical because whether you're a teacher or a parent or a student, you're going to be in conflict with someone at some stage. That just is the way the world works. So I want to be thinking about, well, how can we do that in a way that honours one another as people made in the image of God, and that, of course, honours God. I mean, God and the heavenly hosts, they're above us and they're watching everything we do. God is deeply invested in education, and I believe he is overjoyed when we do things like manage conflict well, manage it like Christians. And so I want to get some of the experts in the field to talk to us about, well, how can we manage conflict well within our Christian community? So there's some of the things that I'm pretty interested in, but I'd love to hear about what you're passionate about as well. What do you want to hear about? There have been a few people already who have recommended guests for the podcast, and that's worked out really well. So if you have any ideas, please shoot them through to me. Please shoot them through. I'm always trying to think of new and exciting things that I can talk about and have guests discuss with me for this podcast. So I always include in the show notes, that's the sort of description of each podcast, I always include my email address. So make sure you send me an email if you've got a topic recommendation, a guest recommendation, and guess what? You're even allowed to recommend yourself. If you're listening and you think, hey, I reckon Paul completely roasted that and he's missed the point there, or if you think there's something new you could add to a conversation that's been had or a brand new conversation altogether, I would love to hear from you. Absolutely love to hear from you. So please do get in touch. So let me close this final episode of 2022 by saying thank you so much for listening. It's been a real treat to have a creative project like this, and it's been even better that there are people listening to it and benefiting from it. I really appreciate it when people send me messages or when we meet in person, say that they've been listening to the podcast, because sometimes it can just feel like I sit here, I talk to my laptop for a little while, I might interview a guest, and then I upload it and it just goes out into the ether. And I don't really know how much of an impact it's had. So I really appreciate it when people message me or comment and say, hey, look, love that episode, or great job there. But thank you so much for listening. Thank you for being a part of this in that way. And I really hope that this break is refreshing and rejuvenating for you. I hope that you're able to take stock, to reflect as we were talking about, and to come into 2023 ready to continue working to further God's kingdom through education, whether you're doing that as a teacher or as a parent or even as a student. I pray that God will establish the work of your hands in 2023. God bless you all.